Good afternoon. Oh, we've been through this. So, one of my favorite things to do when I have a chance to stand behind a microphone is I say good afternoon. The audience says good afternoon. All right, and we try it a second time, and the second time with as much enthusiasm as we can muster on a Wednesday. At the tail end of the day, we try it a second time. So, good afternoon. I realize a couple of things. One, I need new material bad. And second, that one will never get old to me. So thank you for thank you for indulging me just a little bit. If you'll give me a moment to do just a couple introductory things. First, let me thank Dan for that introduction. It has been eye-opening to participate in the legislative cycle. Give me the numbers any day of the week. I feel like those are a lot more straightforward. The bill that he shepherded through the legislature made it to 229 pages, and we were still looking at it when it was through its 25th amendment. So even when we think we've got a handle on what is changing or what we think is going to happen, there's always, as long as there is time on the clock, it feels like the legislature will take at full advantage of that timing. Uh, like he talked about, one of the things we're going to see is the rest of the legal division is currently back in Indianapolis, working on a series of memos that will cover the changes that Dan talked about. We'll also cover some of the other changes that will impact the upcoming budgeting cycle. So separate from what you're going to hear in conference today and tomorrow, know that the department will be releasing information that will help us to brace for any of the changes we're going to see happen this year. I'd also like to take a moment to thank State Board of Accounts. Lori and Ricky have been fantastic partners. They also gave us plenty of time to work on, finalize, and send them our slides so that they could make them available to each one of you. She does her best working with what I have to offer, and she still puts up with me. So thank you, Lori. The leadership of the association, thank you for finding for finding this venue. Occasionally, I really do feel like I'm from a small town as I sort of walk into the restrooms and think these are really nice. Okay, okay, all right. Would like to take a moment to introduce other members of the department that are here with us today. Dan gave me credit for uh, this on-time certification, but it helps when you have inherited a very when you've inherited the best staff in the game. And so we have got we have got 4 budget field reps with us today. They have been handling questions. They've been having conversations at the resource table that we have in the back, which is important. I mean, over the last few years, we hope that you have seen more of your field reps at presentations like this one, even though they are not on stage today, or even though they are not going to get called to the microphone today. It's important that you can see them and that they can see you, that they are hearing the presentations we are giving, they are hearing the promises that we are making, they are being put in, we are exposing them to you as often as we can. With the amount of time I feel like I spend on the road, it is often easier to get a hold of them. And where at presentations like this one, I will be doing my best to speak in generalities, it is the field reps that are the best resource that we offer. And I would say that even if they were not here. They keep us out of trouble they keep us out of trouble in a very specific way. Would like to draw attention to the newest member to the DLGF team. We've got Tammy Byerly, who is from Southern Indiana. If you'll just raise hand. Thank you. When we think about local government as an industry, right? Someone who has learned the language, someone who has sat in the seats that you are currently sitting in. Whenever we have an opportunity to bring someone with experience in local government on board, we are more than happy to do it. Knowing that she knows the terminology, that she knows some of the struggles that you guys have gone through, it is another tool in our arsenal to make sure that we're able to refine the documentation or the memos or provide new tools to each one of you that will allow you to go through the process. So we have not assigned her any counties yet for this season, but next year she'll be right there on the forefront, attending the workshops, hosting the workshops, working the budgets, reviewing the budgets. All right, so Lori, I've got this right that I am all that's standing between these people and the rest of their evening? Perfect. All right. Uh, Perfect. Stood, I've given presentations where I was the last person I was the last presentation before lunch. This one feels like it's even more pressure to kind of get this right. All right. So this is my 12th presentation in the last 23 days. But I still get nervous presenting in front of the auditors. It wasn't that long ago that I gave my first presentation at a Sheraton in Indianapolis. And what I remember about that presentation is the dry cleaning bill more than anything else. What you guys can't see behind me, what you guys can't see behind this lectern is the fidgeting. I am standing on the sides of my feet. Will do my best to keep that down to a minimum. Now, often when I am on this side of the microphone, I will say that we don't spend anywhere near enough time together. This might be the one time where I saw some of you last week at the AIC presentations, and I saw several of you at the AIC presentations that were 3 weeks ago. Some of the slides that you will be going through here are being repurposed from that particular presentation, but this is not designed to be that. This is not designed to be the exact same presentation we gave. There are places where I have expanded the information to try to provide a little bit more detail, just general improvements we've made to the slides that specifically try to customize those to an audience that we know is going to be full of auditors. Of my remaining time, between 10 and 15 minutes will be information we talked about at those AIC presentations, and the remaining 45 minutes will be new material. All right. So with that said, let us jump right in. I've got a deceptively short agenda. There's really 3 areas that I want to cover, but we're going to spend most of our time working on that third bullet, that 2020 budget calendar overview, or using the calendar as a tool to talk about our interactions coming up through the course of the year. When we consider how last year looked, the department was effectively juggling two massive changes. On one hand, we were working on implementing the Senate Enrolled Act 321. On the other hand, we were implementing a change to schools where it was a modernization act. Now, this year there are fewer changes that we are looking at, and so it becomes a matter of spending the time talking about refining the existing processes that we're going through. Okay. But if we're going to talk about the future, we need to spend a little bit of time talking about the past. And for that, we need to talk not just about last year, but we have to go all the way back to 2016. Senate Enrolled Act 321 from 2016 is arguably the most important piece of legislation from the department's perspective since the circuit breaker caps went into play about a decade ago. Among the things that it changed, and we'll cover more than one during the course of the presentation, it changed the budget certification date for the department. Now, on your end, your due dates, your timelines, what you were required to do didn't change. But what we can see on the slide behind me is that the department lost 45 days to process that information from raw data into certified budget order. Now, embarrassingly, it was the commissioner that pointed out that we lost more than 45 days. If we take the 45 days times the 12 people that were working on it, times the 10 hours a day times the 10 hour a day minimum that they were working to process that information, the department lost 45 days per person. Now, while we were able to successfully implement this one, it's important to note that this wasn't a one-time change. 321 has redefined or established a new normal for the budget certification process. The processes you guys went through, the timetables that we were working on, are the timetables that we should expect from the department going forward. But I can put a sharper point on that. Last year, we sent out the first 59 1782s on November 8th. When we sent those out, we were immediately received feedback saying, did you mean to send me the 1782? Did you send me the wrong one, or did you send me last year's? By comparison, a year earlier, the department sent out its first 1782 on December 12th. So if we were going to lose 45 days on the back end, it was important that we took action as soon as we could, that we distributed as much information to you as we could when it was available. 1782s were one of the things that we did, or sending out the 1782s early was one of the places we were able to start saving ourselves time. On November 19th, we set a personal best, set out 298 1782s on the same day. November 20th, first budget certified. By comparison, a year prior, we didn't certify our first budget order until January 14th. And so if we're losing time on the back end, the department needed to take action early. We had to push out information sooner than we had ever considered doing it. By December 31st, 73 counties had a certified budget order, and by January 10th, we had certified the 92nd order. Again, by comparison, a year earlier, we certified 44 budgets on February 14th. Okay. So while we did our best at a number of presentations during the course of the year to warn units or introduce the idea that the process was going to be changing, having gone through it for the first time this year, we have a much better sense of what those changes actually look like. I would make the recommendation to everyone in this room that you should anticipate, or you should anticipate to have your 1782 in hand before Thanksgiving. Now, that is not a promise that we're going to have all 2,500 done by that time, but for the units that we accidentally caught off guard, for those units who received a 1782 before they were ready for it, they had the same 10 days they've always had to review and respond to it. If they weren't looking for it, there was a chance that they may not have been able to take advantage of those full 10 days as they've been able to in the past. So just know that this is the 321 established a new normal. The process that we went through last year is going to look a lot like the process we went through this year. Okay, so how did we pull it off? When we review what the department did to pull off a change of this magnitude, there's a couple things that we can point to. Now, the first one, I generally warn myself before I even get to this slide that I need to be careful at how I present it. Standing next to General Counsel, I feel like I need to be even more careful on how I present this one, because the first one isn't statutory requirement. It is not something we are compelling you to do. It's just a request. Statute is quite clear, and we'll take a look at the calendar here in a moment, of the last dates that you can take action to have a public hearing or to adopt a budget. All we're asking is consideration of potentially taking action earlier than you had in the past. If it's not going to compromise the end product, if you have all the information you need, if you already have a meeting scheduled, and you can adopt a budget and you can submit a budget to us, these are the steps that, while we know that there will always be a late season surge, the ones that we're able to take advantage of early, the ones we're able to process early, give the department as much time to focus on the surge as we can. Now, if you can't, then we go back to the statutory due dates, the last dates that you can take action. For those units that can, it benefits the department to be able to take care of some of our responsibilities as early in the season as possible. Now, where counties specifically have more resources, they have more complex budgets they're putting together. If you can't take action earlier, we understand. Now, where the department did make tremendous inroads last year was with townships. The information was available to them. They were able to process it, submit it, and allow us to review it, which freed up our undivided attention for working with the more complicated units when those became available. Now, the second one we get to fight about just a little bit. Last year, the department spent a lot of time really hammering units about due dates, about submission statuses, and this came from the top of the department down to the bottom. So whether it was emails and memos that you were receiving directly from the commissioner, or the communications director, or the budget director, or the field staff, we wanted to make sure that we were emphasizing the importance of the deadlines. The downside to taking the upside to taking a position like that one is starting to sort of better appreciate how the budget certification process works like dominoes. At every step in the process, we are either waiting for information or we are handing information off. By focusing on the due dates, we made sure that everybody was meeting their statutory obligations to either submit information, to process information, or submit information. The downside to that particular process of really hammering home due dates and deadlines is it's not an easy way to make friends. So additionally, this is a place where the department, or more specifically where I need to do a better job of leading by example. At AIC, I was able to apologize to Jackie. Today, I apologize to Lori. It seems like a little thing, but having the slides ready, having the slides prepared in advance, or the department making the gateway, whether it's a little thing like having the slides prepared in advance, or little things like granting access to the gateway forms earlier than we have in the past, give you more time to process and to interact with that information. So if the department is going to focus on due dates, it is only fair that you guys get to focus on those due dates as well. In cases where we are either not keeping pace with what we did last year, where we are not meeting the due dates that are identified in statute, or we're not keeping up with the due dates that we have set for ourselves to try to improve the process, it is more than fair to point that out to us. Now, if we are watching you as you are submitting your due dates and you are watching us as we are submitting the due dates, what we're going to create is a sort of a feedback loop where everybody is focusing on improving the process or meeting their obligations so that they're not the one who is holding up our ability to either certify budgets not holding up our ability to compile information or ultimately to certify budgets on time. Number 3 was an internal change that we made, and this one definitely caught people off guard. Last year, as we were distributing the 1782s, let me try that again. In the past, when we distributed 1782s, we sent them out countywide. You knew if you got your 1782, every township, every library, every school also received them. Last year, we've put the finishing touches on a piece of software that was developed by the department that allowed us to send out 1782s as they were ready. If Township A was ready but the county wasn't, if the county and the libraries were ready but the townships weren't, we could send your 1782 to you, have you process it, and then collect that information. What we didn't do was update some of our tracking information, and so we created a headache for ourselves where if there are 2 school corporations and we sent the 1782 to the one that was ready, the one that didn't receive one was following up with the department, asking those questions of why didn't I receive mine at the same time. Sending out unit-specific 1782s is still the direction we're going to move in. We'll just need to, on our end, update how we are tracking and presenting information about where each county or each unit is in the process, so that the department can head off the questions that we created for ourselves. That will take us to 3 and 4. All right. So if 19 went well, but if we are looking at ways that we could potentially improve this one, the first one we would point to is an increased emphasis on these preseason responsibilities, the conversations, the reports that we can put together, that we can collect, that we can take care of now, as compared to when we actually get into the full swing of the full swing of the budget season itself. From the department's perspective, from about July 15th through the end of the year, we are running downhill. And where we want to be able to continue to provide the same level of customer service that you have grown accustomed to, we know that that's when our volume starts to really increase of the questions that are coming in. Even though it may be an easy question, even though it may be one that we can answer in just a few moments, we have got to saw through the 10 or the 50 or the 100 emails that came in before it. The more questions, the more that we can do during this preseason, during a relatively slow time at the department, ultimately the better process that we can create during our busiest season. Number 2, the more times I see the second one, I wish I would have wrote that in English instead of whatever I was thinking at the time. The field reps, the field staff, were given a responsibility, or were challenged with visiting each county at least once between January 15th and June 30th. This doesn't count as a visit to Orange County, so our workshops, the places where we were going to be there anyway, would not count. They are scheduling appointments to come to the county to interact with you without something actually being due, right? So where we know they're going to be out in the counties for the workshops, when we're talking workshops, we're talking about a 45-minute window. There's information that needs to be collected. There is information that needs to be shared. And then as soon as that appointment is done, the next person is getting subbed in. For what we were trying to accomplish during this preseason was just to have a more thorough, just a slower conversation. If you always wondered what it meant when the department cut a budget, or why your budget was cut, or what you could do to avoid it, if you had questions about best practice, or if you had just questions about what the 1782 is and isn't, what it can be done, how you can respond to it, this is what we were trying to accomplish with these county visitations. Now, I told the field reps before they started scheduling them two things. One, if the interest was low enough, if the interest was too low, don't make the trip, right? We want to make ourselves available. Sorry. While we know that we can always reach the field reps over email and on the phone, we wanted to be present. But if the interest in the county it was a bad time, ask them not to make the trip or to try to reschedule for a time in the future. And I also told them that they wouldn't be judged based on attendance. Now, with that said, attendance had been maybe a little bit lower than I was originally anticipating. While this was part of the regular course of business for the department, even a few years ago, we know that during our first year, we're trying to be as present in your communities as we can. As we look at ways to try to improve this one or to try to become more useful, I'm hoping that these county visits can continue to be a resource, not just to the county offices. The county offices have those resources available to them, but for those townships, for those libraries, bringing them in so that we can just sort of coach them up in a way that's sort of different than the presentations we give, different than the budget workshops where we're trying to accomplish a very specific goal, but just trying to sort of raise the tide on all ships. Number 3 there, the increased promotion of the DLGF resources. I've got about 30 slides that cover different aspects of the department's website. They cover the gateway with the login side, the gateway public site, just trying to point to some of the reports that the department puts together, some of the reports, the memos, the presentations that we have staged for your benefit. But unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get to those. I did not make it to those at the AIC presentations, and I do not think I'm going to make it to those again today. But by promoting those resources, what we're trying to do is put the tools in your hand, put better tools in your hand. If the reports need to be updated, or if we are taking time to put these together, whether to assist units or because we're statutorily required to, if you don't know that they're out there, if you don't know that we've created those, or for those new folks that are out there who have not yet had a chance to fully explore all the various reports that the department puts together, wanted to continue to promote those so that we're not duplicating our efforts. The department puts it together, and then internally, each unit is trying to put together a report of their own. The fourth one I wish I would have wrote in English also, that strategic communication comes back to trying to effectively communicate to you why you're being contacted, what action needs to be taken, which action we need you to actually take. For now, I would say that if you're receiving a memo, it's because if you're receiving a memo from our communications director, it's because you could potentially be impacted by the topic of that memo. Would point to the field staff as a fantastic translating tool. Does the department need you to do something? Is this just something we want to make you aware of? Is there an upcoming due date that you should be working toward? Okay. The second thing I wanted to cover, and I'm actually going to go through these next couple slides relatively quickly. This is a very strange presentation this is a very strange topic for the department to present on. But we're looking at the State Examiners Directive 2018-2, or the one for the MVH fund, the restricted or the sub fund. The State Board of Accounts, and embedded in the slides here, you'll see that they have put together a lot of information on the subject. They've posted FAQs, they've posted clarifying memos, they've posted the directive itself. On your side, you have been living with this since January 1, so you are very much in tune with what is going on. The reason why I wanted to cover it today was to focus on the department's, or wanted to focus on the department's role in this directive. All right. Quick recap. December 20th, 2018, the directive was released, required the December 20th, the directive was released. State Board of Accounts provided instructions on accounting for and managing costs, expenses associated with construction, reconstruction, or preservation. Also authorized the creation of the subfund. January 1, or since January 1, everyone should be accounting for their expenses using the information provided by the State Board of Accounts. What we see on this particular slide is a link to all the supporting information that they have, that the State Board of Accounts has created, and it's posted and made available to you. The part that I'm interested in is the budgeting aspect of it, right? So on the left-hand slide, on the left-hand side of the slide, we can see that how the State Board of Accounts is expecting the counties and the cities and towns to account for MVH or their highway funds. This would have been implemented on the Jan 1 of 2019. On the right-hand side, we can see what the department's expectations are from a budgeting perspective. Now, the cliff notes or the takeaways are actually found at the bottom of the slide. On the left side, January 1, the new fund and subfund should be used. On the right-hand side, there is no change in the budgeting process for 2019 that the department will be going through. Your certified budget order still stands as created, independent of the new directive. Okay. But I can put a sharper point on that one if you'll give me 5 rhetorical questions. So the first question I would ask myself was, as a unit, should I have advertised and adopted a budget for this subfund in 2019? And the answer to that is no. If the directive came out mid-December, there's a very good chance that you were already holding a certified budget order by the time State Board of Accounts released the directive that would have required. I blew that one. There's a chance that you were already holding a certified budget order at the time that the directive came out, so there was no opportunity to advertise or adopt this subfund in 2019. Okay. Rhetorical question number 2. Well, does that mean I need to do an additional appropriation, or I need to do additional appropriations to use this subfund? And the answer to that one is no also. When the department certified your budget, we certified all expenses that were coming out that would be associated with it. Just because you're tracking the expenses at the fund or the subfund level doesn't change the original appropriation that the department provided to you. That appropriation stands. You already have the spending authority that you would need to make all expenses that you had planned on during the course of the year. Coupled with that one, does that mean I need to do a reduction to my MVH fund in order to make the money available in my subfund? And the answer to that question is no as well, for the same reason. The department is gave you an appropriation for a single fund. That hasn't changed regardless of how you're accounting for the expenditures. Okay, but that's all 2019 stuff. What about 2020 stuff? For the budget that you'll be putting together for next year, will you be advertising and adopting this fund and the subfund? And so the answer to that question is also no. The department's certification process hasn't changed. From our perspective, you still have a single fund. You'll be accounting for the expenses in 2 places, but you'll have a single appropriation. You'll have a single budget that will cover all expenses between those 2. Okay. Last one here. Will there be any changes to the department's budget certification process because of the new directive? And this one I get to say yes to. As you are working with your field rep, as you are putting together the budget, the department is going to be interested in any and all expenses from the fund and the subfund, any and all revenue, any and all cash that's associated with those 2 individual pieces, so that we can put them back together, certify a single appropriation before you go back to accounting for your expenses in those 2 places. So a slight change that we're going to need information from 2 separate places, but ultimately from the department's perspective, there are very few changes you're going to see from an appropriation process. Okay. I feel like I am running short on time already. What I'd like to spend the next half an hour looking at the 2020 budget calendar. Something we did a lot last year. In this particular section, we're going to use the next 6 months as a tool to talk about what the department's plans are, what changes we'll be making, things we'd like to make sure we're putting on your radar as soon as possible. Because we are presenting at the auditors conference today, while the section is similar to what was discussed at AIC, the details have changed pretty significantly. Okay. Now, when we talk about the calendar itself, there's a couple things we should reference. First, we will still be looking at the preliminary budget calendar. We post this early as a tool for you, but we know that after the legislative cycle, the department often releases a second calendar. If there are any changes that we need to be aware of, if there's any new requirements, if there are any changes, we release a second calendar later in the year that contains the final dates we should be aware of. When we talk about the calendar, we're generally starting off with just a short blurb of what's being covered, what's important, what this requirement is. We often include a link to the code site or a reference to the code citation. So if you want to go more in depth than what is being listed here, you can see where the department is getting these due dates, where we are coming up with these changes, why we're collecting what we're collecting, how we're collecting what we're collecting. In some other instances, we have the ability to post the most recent documentation provided by the department. So you'll even sometimes see the memo that goes into further detail about what we're seeing on that particular calendar. Okay. Last thing before we jump into the dates themselves is how this or two things. One, this calendar is not designed to be comprehensive. Although we are looking at slides that have been boiled down to just topics that I'm hoping are relevant to each of you, the calendar that we have posted online is also used by townships, used by school corporations, used by libraries. So as you're reviewing it, know that not every date, not every submission is specifically targeted towards you, but is being used by some unit across the state. Last thing. When we're looking at the calendar, one of the weaknesses in it is that it tends to focus on due dates. Statute says it needs to be done by X date. But just like we see with the budgeting process, these processes can't happen overnight. By focusing on the due date, we would encourage each unit to work backwards. If I need to submit it on this date, how much time do I need to allot for advertising? If I needed to submit it on this date, when are we actually planning on advertising and adopting this resolution? When are we planning on meeting to start the process? If this is when we need to submit it to the department by. The other weakness in this particular calendar is it doesn't account for vacations, festivals, holidays, time away from the office. And so while we would recommend that this calendar be used as a starting point, customization is important. If there are days where, if you are going to be out of the office on the submission date, and we know that, it gives you a better chance to plan for these changes before we miss a submission date or before we're on the wrong side of a particular calendar. Okay. All right. So with that said, let's start with one that is probably the most relevant. When I started giving these presentations about 3 weeks ago, I was talking about this in the future tense. We were talking about the supplemental lit distribution that was going to happen. Now we are about midway through the month. Two of these 3 due dates have already come and gone. On May 1st, the state budget agency needed to identify each one of the counties that was a recipient of the supplemental distribution. By May 15th, the department had to create unit-level calculations for each recipient, or county-specific unit-level recipients for the supplemental lit distribution. May 31st is the due date for the county auditor to distribute the money that was collected from them to the individual recipients. Okay, so that part you guys knew. Janie set the table. I do want to spend a little bit of time talking a little bit more about that supplemental lit distribution. This is the code citation itself, and you'll forgive me for not reading it. The legal division and I have an agreement that I do my best not to interpret statute, and they refuse to do long division. And so the important part about the supplemental distribution, like Janie talked about, are the 2 pieces that are underlined in these tiny letters behind me. The first one being the determination year, and the second one being the trust account balance year. And so if we didn't have enough acronyms floating around, if we didn't have enough acronyms already floating around, I need to talk about DY and TAY. So like Janie talked about, the determination year is the current year. And so when the budget agency is trying to figure out who qualifies, what they're going to start off with is how much did they certify for during the course of the year. And then whether or not the existing trust account balance is within 15 or greater than or equal to 15% of that total. If it's greater than, they will distribute the difference. They'll distribute it back down to 15%. But when we're talking about the supplemental distribution, we should look at it like it's a safety valve, right? Where what the state is trying to do is return the money that was collected on behalf of the counties to the counties. Now, if you'll forgive me a imperfect comparison, picture doing settlement once a year, right? You've collected, bless you, good one, Martha. Picture doing settlement once a year. You've collected those property tax dollars and you've settled, but people have continued to pay their bills or pay late. The 15% represents a threshold that could potentially trigger a second settlement, right? Money that was collected by the counties going to the units that should have them, instead of those dollars staying within the state's coffers. 3 years ago, the state made a transition from the local option income tax to the local income tax. And other than just dropping the O out of the acronym, there were a couple other changes that may have been overlooked. And one of those changes related to the supplemental lit distribution. In the past, a county had to hit a balance of 50% or greater to receive the supplemental distribution. During this transition, that threshold fell from 50 to 15. Okay. So in the last year that Lowitts were in place, nobody received a supplemental distribution. In the first year that the Lits were in place, two counties received a distribution. Last year it was up to 16, and this year it's up to 48. And so at this point we've hit the tipping point. We need to talk about how this is working, where these distributions are coming from. Also, this year, instead of just informing the counties that were eligible to be a recipient, we have posted those unit level reports, except for the one we missed, which I believe was Harrison County. We've posted reports for all 92 counties. So on the memo that Jenny sent out on the memo that our communications director sent out last Wednesday, it included a list of all the recipients. But each of you can find a county-specific report showing that same $0 distribution. At this point, with as many recipients as we had out there, we wanted to make sure that you were able to see whether or not you did or did not qualify and any of the calculations that would be associated with it. Last thing I should mention, this supplemental distribution is unfortunately outside of anyone's control. So the Department of Revenue is going to continue to collect this income tax. They're going to continue to certify those numbers to the state budget agency, and if you hit that 15% trigger, you'll receive a supplemental distribution. This isn't something the counties have done incorrectly. If you are not receiving a supplemental distribution, it's not because you've done something wrong. If you are receiving a supplemental distribution, again, it's not because you've done something wrong. It's just the way the math is working out between the money that's being collected by the Department of Revenue and the dollar amounts that are being certified by the state budget agency. Two quick examples to put as sharp a point on this as possible. Hypothetical county had a certified distribution of $100 between all of their various lits. Their trust account balance was only $10. No distribution is going to be triggered in this particular case. Hypothetical county number two, $100 in their determination year, $20 in their trust account balance, so we can confirm that the trust account balance is in excess of their 15%. The supplemental distribution isn't the 20, it isn't the 15, it's only the 5. It's only the difference. It's only the excess on top of the 15%, which led to one county that actually received a $40 supplemental distribution that was the entire amount that was shared among all units in their county. But it was because that was the part that they exceeded the 15% by. All right. So there's one other point we should talk about when we're talking about the supplemental distributions is the role that the state budget agency plays. We know that they provide those certified amounts, the amount that's being distributed by the state auditor's office 1/12 or 1 month at a time. They are also required to put together these county informational reports. And on these reports, not only can they show you where these calculations are coming from, but they updated those last year so that they could more effectively present the supplemental lit distribution information. And it's you got to look at it just right. But it'll show you each one of the calculations we're talking about: the determination year, the tax, the DY, the TAY. That information is included under the county, the SBA's county information report. There's a link there. Now, this led to a little bit of, not controversy, there was a little bit of back and forth that the department dealt with last year as it relates to these reports. And both of these come back to a function of timing. The budget agency was required to post the county informational report on November 2nd. The distribution is based on the balance as of December 31st, so they had to post a report before they had access to all the information to make the determination, which meant that there were counties last year that looked in November and said, yep, I'm going to receive a supplemental distribution, and didn't get one. When those last 2 months came in and were reconciled, it actually pulled them down from where they were originally over the 15% threshold to under the 15% threshold. Group 2 were people who took a look at these county information reports and saw, well, looks like I'm not going to get one this year. But when the last 2 months of activity came in, it pushed them over the 15%, and they ended up getting an unexpected distribution, an unexpected windfall. In working with the budget agency, what we have sort of encouraged them to do is to continue to meet the statutory requirement to post that report on November 2nd. But as the estimates make way to actuals, to post an updated report. If we head out to this link, the report that's posted out there now is the one from March, not the one that they originally posted in November. Those last 2 months where they had estimates, they've replaced those with the final figures. So separate from the memo that the department released on their behalf, if you want to see where your county currently sits, under the most recent version of these county information reports, we can see how the budget agency has calculated this particular distribution. Okay. So once the budget agency has decided, or once the budget agency has calculated and figured out how much is going to each county, this is where the department gets back involved. And we've got a page full of code citation, but let's just focus on the bottom. Since the trigger here is that the trust account year, the distributions that we're doing are based on your the distributions that we did this year are based on your 2017 configuration. So if you were to compare the proportions of your 2019 distributions, you'll see that those don't match up with the reports that the department provided for your supplemental, and that's done deliberately. Where we could potentially run into issues, though, are for the counties that adopted a jail lit last year, or for a county that has changed its allocation between its public safety and its PSAP in 2018, because we're using your 2017 configuration, even though your monthly distribution is showing that you're receiving it for these 5 reasons, if those reasons didn't exist in 17, the report the department is posting is focused on that 2017 configuration. There was one county in particular that adopted a special purpose lit last year. And so they wanted to be quite sure that that special purpose, or the rates associated with that special purpose, wouldn't be receiving this supplemental distribution that was based on a number from a year prior to it. So when the department's putting it together, we're using your 2017 configuration, all the allocations and calculations that were in place in 17 for your supplement. Next year, if you're a recipient, we're going to end up using your 18 information for that exact same purpose. Which I should also point out, when for those 16 counties that received a distribution last year, it meant that the supplemental distribution that you received was calculated based on your former Lowit configuration. And so part of the reason why the template looks so significantly different for those folks who received it last year and this year, part of the reason why the template looks so significantly different was we had to go into the catacombs to draw down the old CAGIT or the COIT or the seated rates that you used to have. This year, we were able to use an existing book, an existing template that looks a lot more like the reports that the department has provided from an income tax standpoint. Okay. Last thing on the subject, the supplemental distribution will fluctuate from year to year. Not receiving it in the past doesn't mean you won't receive it next year. Receiving it this year does not mean that you're going to end up receiving it next year. Each year, the budget agency will identify who the recipients are. The department will post, and the department will post those calculations. Okay. June. The department will be hosting gateway training sessions like we have in the past. Last year, we made a transition to move us out of computer labs into a more lecture style approach for these trainings. I will not be in attendance of these. They will actually be led. The presentation was discussed, revised, improved, and finalized by the field staff. The field staff will continue to lead these trainings. If we think about an unofficial start of the budgeting season, this is about as good as they come. An opportunity to just revisit how budgets are put together, the interactions that you'll have with the department. Now, one of the changes that we'll be making this year, and this one's important, is we are trying to very specifically target these training classes. About a month ago, the communications director sent out a training survey, just trying to collect feedback from those folks that we would hope would attend, to ask them what they would prefer, how they would prefer to receive that training from the department. The results came back quickly, and it didn't take us long to identify that there were two very specific camps. There are two very specific camps. For the more experienced auditors, they had either informed us, to paraphrase, that they were familiar with the information that was being presented and they weren't planning on attending. If we could post some information, if we could do it as a webinar, they would be happier with that function. The second half came in of the newer officials that were out there that did want the department to have a presence to give a live presentation as compared to a canned one. And so that is the audience that we are targeting for this year's Gateway training. It is year one, year two. It's largely focused on the definitions, the concepts. If you have been in your current position for 3 years, we would love to have you at this training class, but I promise you, we will bore you to death. What we're trying to do is be as respectful for your time as possible. There are people who would absolutely benefit from an introduction to budgeting, an introduction to the terms and terminology, just talking about what this process looks like at the mile-high level. That's who the class is designed for. I'm not going to turn anyone away, but just know that if you're planning on attending one of the 9 classes, that's the target audience. We'll also be doing an introduction to Gateway. And so we're not doing a deep dive just into the budget module, but introducing the TIF management, the debt management, the budget modules, taking newer officials through understanding the difference between the State Board of Accounts side of the house and the DLGF side of the house. Now, for the more experienced auditors out there, we have posted the audio recordings of the presentations we gave last year. The one that's on budget training lasts about 61 minutes long. The one that's focused more on the Gateway side of the house is 38 minutes. Both of those training videos, so not just the slides themselves, but an actual sort of narrated podcast version of the presentation, is currently available online. Our next goal will be to create a 300 level presentation. The one for those folks that have been around for those folks who don't need the trainings that we currently have canned, but we can really do a deep dive into some of the budget concepts that we need to be aware of. Next year, we'll end up recording and posting a presentation like that. So, okay. All right. As of yesterday, we had already received 240 people had signed up for 1,100 possible seats. If you are interested in attending this one, I would encourage you to sign up quickly. Not all locations, even though we've switched from a computer lab to a more lecture style, there's still limited amount of seats that there's still a limited amount of seats available. On the slide and on the communications director's memo from last week is information about registration. Would encourage you to sign up early if you're interested in attending. Okay. Oof. All right. Okay. Annexations. So what the next couple of slides are going to cover are annexations, or more specifically, the offline annexation reporting that counties submit to the department. Generally, we collect it during this particular time of year. We use this information for a number of reasons, including validating the CNAV submissions that you'll be making at the beginning part of August. Like we've emphasized in the past, the annexation report that you submit to us should include both halves of the equation, both the taxing district that lost the parcel and the taxing district that would be gaining the parcel. The report that you're submitting to us in most cases should net to zero. It's the one check that you can do on that report before you send it in. The annexations that you'll be reporting to us are annexations that were effective between January 2 of 2018 and January 1 of 2019. That's the timetable that you're going to be submitting. Okay. So why bring that up? So before last year, I had never heard of the concept of a pre-census year. Now, the code citation that we're looking at here focuses on the effective date of annexations in a pre-census year. Okay. So the reason I bring it up, when we're looking at what you're reporting this year, although 2019 is that pre-census year, we're talking about annexations that were effective last year. The annexations that are effective this calendar year, the ones that you would be reporting to us next year, those are the ones that are falling in this pre-census annexation year situation. So the important part is, when you're reporting this year, the annexations are no different than what you've reported to us in the past. As we start to consider this same request for next year, we're going to have a very different conversation about when the annexations that are taking place today are going to be actually made to be effective. More information, wanted to introduce that concept to you today, but know that there'll be more information next year about how you'll need to manage those, the annexations that may look like they would be effective on Jan 1 of 2020, but will not be effective until Jan 1 of 2021. Okay. So no change this year. We are in a pre-census year, but that is not from a reporting standpoint, it's from an effective date standpoint. More information coming from the department to come. All right, I'm going to do these next two slides very quickly. June 30th represents the unofficial start of the budgeting season. This is when the math starts. June 30th, the assessed value growth quotient will be available, which is the key puzzle piece that will allow the department to perform a number of calculations, most importantly, coming up with those estimated max levy reports, which we know is a key puzzle piece for units to have when figuring out in figuring out the revenue sources that they'll use to fund their upcoming budget. We'll also be releasing the CUME Fund report, but July 15th also is the department's statutory due date to provide the updated mental health and developmental disability adjustments. Now, we know that we've seen 3 statutory changes to mental health and developmental disability over the last 3 years. In addition to posting the report, you'll see as detailed a memo as we can provide that talk about how it was configured 2 years ago, how it was configured and calculated last year, and then ultimately where those numbers are coming from this year. The other place where I think we can improve the reports is by including those specific code citations, and in addition to providing the final total, making sure that we provide you as much information as possible so that if you wanted to recalculate these numbers by hand, you have the tools available to do it. sorry, I should touch that one also. July 15th, the department will also be releasing its unit level miscellaneous revenue estimates. This one's a pretty significant change from last year as well. The state auditor's office and DLGF had always worked together to release these estimates. State auditor's office would put together a single page report that would show how much they anticipated your distributions to go up for MBH or local road and street or the ABC gallonage. The department would then use that one-page report to figure out the unit level distribution. So we would calculate how much each unit received. We would calculate how much the state auditor's office thought that you would get more this year, and we would provide you a single figure. This year, there's just going to be a single report. DLGF will provide that same unit level detail to show you how much. We'll calculate your historical change. We will be able to provide you that single total, but the state auditor's office won't have that same report that you've been used to. You'll be stuck with just the one report that shows the actual dollar amounts for the upcoming year. July 31st, and 35 more seconds. We talked before about Senate Enrolled Act 321 being a very important piece of legislation. One of the other things that it required the department to do was to put together circuit breaker estimates. We will continue to release the circuit breaker estimates, and we'll continue to post those on our website. Those would be the unit level reports for what we anticipate the circuit breaker to be in the upcoming year. We'll have an opportunity to reconcile those totals against the actual information when it becomes available in April. But we give you a number that serves as a starting point. Now, while statute requires the department to post that report, it does not require you to use those numbers. I will be the first to tell you that estimating circuit breakers is challenging, to say the least. If you feel as if you can come up with an estimate, statute absolutely gives you the ability to use the most accurate estimate that you can come up with. But statute does put you in the position where you do need to at least consider the impact that circuit breaker will have on your communities. Without saying any names, there is a city and there is a school corporation that both anticipated circuit breaker losses of 0 over the last few years. One's actual circuit breaker was $6 million. The other one's actual circuit breaker was $15 million. While not anticipating, makes it look like you're going to have while not estimating the impact of circuit breaker, allows the department to allows the department to approve a higher budget for you. It does not guarantee funding for that higher budget. You could potentially put yourself in a situation where the budget that you are working on is unfundable. At this point, I'm waiting for the orchestra music to start to swell. Okay, sorry. 3 more slides, tops. All right, so we've come to a bright red slide. All right, and so this one is, this one's the white whale. This one is my particular pet project for, if I pull off one thing as budget director, it's going to be improving this particular slide. Last year, I told the commissioner that he could grade me on a pass-fail scale on whether or not we were able to certify all the budgets before the new due date. I have not committed to that same level of pass or fail for AV certification, but it is going to continue to be a focus of the department. Statutorily, counties have until August 1st to certify to the department the net assessed values for the county itself. Last year, 19%. 19%? Nope, sorry, 20%. 19 out of 92 counties met that due date. Okay. Now, as we mentioned last year, county auditors are not in this alone. You guys are getting hammered, but it's not as if the work is stopping in your office. For every presentation, for every time I've given this slide, the assessment division director, Barry Wood, has given the same presentation, has given the same speech to the assessors. As Wes had alluded to earlier, the early indications is they've answered the call, right? If we look at just a couple of key metrics of the data compliance and the ratio studies, we can see where the assessors are stacking up with with their submission progress from the prior year. Now, between the auditors and the assessors, the department received 74 of the 92 sales disclosure reports before the statutory due date of February 1. This year, we had those compliance reports completed and returned to all 92 counties before the end of February. By comparison, last year we only had 82 of those county reports out by the end of February. So everybody was in the position where they had met the first checkpoint. But the real improvement has come on the ratio studies. And I won't read each one of these, but the number of counties that submitted a ratio study on time by the March 1 was 70 out of the 92. The number of counties that submitted their ratio studies earlier than they did last year, 71. There were 10 counties that submitted it more than 30 days sooner, and there were 3 counties that submitted it more than 60 days sooner. Tipton County cut 71 days off their submission date last year. Cut 71 days off their submission date from last year, which is spectacular, but it puts the county in a position where they will have. It is more likely that they'll have the information they need to you sooner than they had in the past. But there's two sides of the coin. Not just the assessors submitting earlier, but the department has to turn that information around. And that's what the second half of the slide is designed to show. 70 counties received their approval earlier than they had in 18. 15 counties more than 30 days earlier, and 1 county more than 60 days earlier, and that was Vigo County, has been approved 2 months earlier than we approved their ratio study last year. The assessors have heard the message. They understand the importance of completing their process so they can turn it over to you earlier than they have in the past. Okay. Da, 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 da. Okay. Last slide, probably. All right, so AV certification is also going to see a change in the process. And so at this point, we're talking about once the information has been processed by the county auditor, what I want to look at is your interactions that you're going to have with Gateway. Last year, the department took a 2-phase approach. Phase 1, you upload your information, make any of the adjustments you need to, answer questions that were specifically related to taxing districts that saw an increase of plus or minus 10%. Phase 2 was the field staff reviewed the information that you had already submitted, asking much more specific questions than we saw in the actual certification process itself. So take you through the process, let you be done, and then start to review the information is how we attacked it last year. This year, I think we found a better way to do it. In an attempt to sort of respond to some of the requests that we received from you guys of trying to better sync Gateway Abstracts review with the CNAV review, we have broken down the AV certification process into the 7 steps that we are looking at on the slide behind me. So instead of focusing our requests on AV changes at the taxing district level, we're now going to start diving into them at an individual level. So if your real property went up, if your personal property went up, if your TIF real, if your TIF personal, or if your TIF pass-through changed by the same 10% threshold, you will get a specific question about that. So instead of trying to figure out why the entire thing changed, we're going to focus our attention on the individual pieces themselves. But that does mean that there's a potential that for one taxing district, you could get all 5 of those first questions. But by collecting the information that way, when the state auditor's office is reviewing your Gateway Abstract submission, they already have these detail level responses that cover these specific changes. I should touch on number 6. We're also going to start trying to expand our review to focus on conservancies. Now, instead of looking at the net assessed value, we're going to be looking at the gross assessed value. But in order to make sure that the AVs didn't spike unexpectedly in those particular areas, we'll be adding a validation that'll just, if it goes up or down by that 10%, we will ask that specific question. We'll also be trying to improve the way that we identify if there were funds that are unlinked, or either funds that weren't linked last year and are this year, or weren't linked last year and they were this year. So effectively trying to give that tool to you to let you know there was a change that took place. Not an error message, not a, you don't have to stop, but just so that you're aware of any potential linkages that we could run into. We're going to try to attack that during the AV certification process. And because we're looking at this at the detail information, we are no longer going to look at it at the taxing district level. So you're not going to have to go through these 7 questions and then answer the same information at the end. We'll add these 6 and remove that 8th one. Trending last day. Okay. Last slide for real. It starts losing its meaning by the 12th time you say it, doesn't it? They're all still here. But, okay. Most important slide. If I would have got these slides, Lori, and you had these printed in front of you, I would have you circle these 3 dates. The 3 most important dates in the budgeting cycle: October 11th, October 22nd, November 1st. Last day to adopt, last day to have a public hearing, last day to advertise for that public hearing. Each year, the department has a number of very uncomfortable conversations on October 12th, on October 22nd, and on November 2nd that start with, I missed the deadline, what should I do now? It's weird to think of the budget certification process. When we think about the budget certification process, there are gaps in the process. But we can tell you on October 12th, if you haven't advertised that public hearing, there are no options in front of you. And even though we are just under 3 weeks away from the deadline, there are no options available to you. If there is one thing you take away from this particular presentation, is to start having the conversations about making sure you are planning on taking action before these due dates. Now, this is a part where I need to be careful. Taking action on these due dates is perfectly fine, but it gives you a very narrow window to try to fit these into. If anything goes wrong and you're planning on taking action on the 11th, the 21st, or the 1st, there's no time to fix it. As the field reps start to review this information and say, hey, I think you put down the wrong number here, there's no time for you to fix it. Internally, would ask, as in conjunction with the budget calendar that we took a look at before, create that unit-specific, that county-specific one of when are we planning on advertising? If something goes wrong, do we have time, or do we need to pick a different date that would give us time to potentially correct any issues? Statute is quite clear about when you have to take action by. The request here is to consider when you're planning on doing it. Let's put ourselves in the best possible position to not get continued, to avoid these uncomfortable conversations, to find ourselves in a position where you have sat through this 90-minute presentation, or you've spent 5 months chasing around your department heads and putting together the reports and coming up with the estimates, and on October 12th, all that work is for nothing. So 3 most important dates, the one thing to take away: make sure that we stay on the right side of these particular due dates.